My stepfather was the perfect dad until I found the locked room in our basement. What was inside made me realize my real father didn't abandon us. I was holding the key when I heard the car door slam in the driveway. They weren't supposed to be back for 3 more days. My hand froze on the deadbolt. That small brass key was still inserted halfway, and I could hear David's voice through the basement ceiling asking Mom where I was. The locked room door stood open behind me, fluorescent lights humming, and spread across the desk were photographs of my father that shouldn't exist. Recent photographs taken last month. I was 7 when Mom married David Bergen. He showed up to our apartment with flowers for her and a remote control car for me, the expensive kind with working headlights. Mom's face transformed when she saw him, like someone had switched on a light inside her that had been dark since Dad left. David knelt to my height, his gray eyes level with mine, and said he knew he could never replace my father, but he'd be honored to be my friend. His hand was warm when we shook. I felt safe immediately. David worked as a financial advisor downtown, the kind of job that meant suits and leather briefcases and client dinners. He drove a silver Lexus he washed every Sunday morning, and he let me help, teaching me the right way to apply wax in circular motions. When I struggled with algebra in 8th grade, he hired a tutor without Mom asking. When I wanted to quit piano after 2 years, he sat me down and talked about commitment in a way that made me want to be better, not guilty for failing. Mom told me the story of Dad's abandonment so many times it calcified into fact. Thomas Waverly walked out when I was 4, leaving a note on the kitchen counter that said he couldn't handle being a husband and father anymore. No forwarding address, no phone calls, just complete silence, like we'd never existed to him at all. Mom said he'd been struggling with depression and drinking, that she'd begged him to get help. She cried when she told me, and I believed every word. David never spoke badly about my father, which made me respect him more. He'd say things like, "Your dad must have been in a lot of pain," or, "Sometimes people make choices they regret." He never tried to make me call him Dad, never pushed for adoption papers. He just showed up consistently for 11 years. Baseball games and algebra tutors and college applications. He was there. We moved into David's house in Westfield 6 months after the wedding, a beautiful colonial with 4 bedrooms. The basement became mine. David converted half of it into a game room with a pool table, dartboard, and massive TV. My friends envied how cool he was. He let us watch R-rated movies Mom would have forbidden, ordered pizza at midnight without asking about homework first, taught us poker using M&Ms as chips. The locked room sat at the far end of the basement, past the water heater and furnace, a plain wooden door with a deadbolt that required a key. David said it was storage for old tax documents and Christmas decorations. Nothing interesting. For 11 years, I never questioned it. Why would I? David had given me everything else. One locked room seemed like a reasonable boundary. 3 weeks ago, the morning after my 18th birthday, David and Mom left for Portland, a financial conference that would keep them away for 5 days. David left me detailed instructions, how to arm the security system, when to put out the trash bins, which neighbor to call if something went wrong. He also left me the house keys, all of them, on a leather keyring. I didn't notice the unfamiliar key until after they'd driven away, smaller than the others, brass instead of silver, with a square head that looked old-fashioned. I held that key for 3 hours before curiosity broke through my respect for David's privacy. I made excuses to myself, checking for water damage, being a responsible house sitter, but I knew I was lying even as I walked down those basement stairs. My heart hammered against my ribs. The deadbolt turned smooth and quiet, well-oiled, suggesting it was used far more often than a storage room should require. The smell hit me first when I opened the door, not musty or dusty like abandoned storage, but fresh, almost clinical. The room was larger than I'd imagined, maybe 15 by 20 feet, with industrial gray carpet and fluorescent lights. 4 metal file cabinets lined the left wall. A desk occupied the far corner with an outdated desktop computer. A cot sat against the right wall with a thin mattress. Someone could live down here, but what made my stomach drop were the walls, covered floor to ceiling with papers and photographs and maps, all connected by color-coded strings. Red strings, blue strings, green strings, intersecting like a spider's web. At the center was a photograph of my father, not the blurry snapshots Mom kept, but a clear, sharp, recent photograph. Thomas Waverly standing in front of a coffee shop, holding a paper cup and laughing. He looked older, grayer, but unmistakably alive. The date stamp read March 15, 2024. 2 months ago, my legs stopped working. I grabbed the desk edge to stay upright. Dad was alive. Dad was alive, and David knew. David had taken this photograph. I stepped closer to the wall, reading the documents pinned there. Newspaper clippings about Dad's disappearance from 11 years ago. Police reports I'd never seen. Bank statements with highlighted sections. Phone records. Emails printed and marked with David's handwriting. One section was labeled Timeline in block letters. It started 8 months before Dad left, documenting his daily routines, his meetings, his routes to work, every detail mapped with obsessive precision, gas station receipts, security camera timestamps, notes about his lunch locations, his gym schedule, the park where he'd take me on Saturdays. Another section bore the label Inconsistencies, lists of things that didn't match the abandonment story. Dad's car was found at the airport but no flight records. Credit cards were never used after that Monday morning. His phone pinging from cell towers in 3 different states simultaneously. Questions scribbled in David's handwriting. Why withdraw $500 but leave $35,000 in savings? Why pack summer clothes in February? Why tell his secretary he'd see her next week? I pulled open the nearest file cabinet. Folders organized by date, each containing printed emails, handwritten notes, receipts, photographs. I grabbed one at random. Inside was a printout of an email chain between Dad and someone named Lawrence Kimball at his accounting firm. They were discussing irregularities in a client's accounts, money moving in ways that didn't match the paperwork. Dad's last email: I'm taking this to the state auditor Monday morning. This is fraud on a massive scale. The date stamp, February 9th, 2013, 3 days before Dad disappeared. I opened another folder, police reports with David's handwriting covering every page, pointing out gaps in the investigation, how the detective closed it after only 10 days without interviewing key witnesses, how security footage from Dad's office building was corrupted and unrecoverable, how Dad's secretary, who insisted he'd seemed normal that last Friday, was never asked to give a formal statement. I found a leather-bound notebook, David's journal. The entries went back 11 years, starting 2 weeks after Dad vanished. The first entry: Thomas was my best friend since college. I know he didn't abandon Claire and Lily. He showed me the files 3 days before he disappeared, the evidence of the fraud he'd discovered. He was scared but determined. Now he's gone and the police won't listen. I'm going to find out what happened. I read forward, watching David's investigation unfold. How he'd initially tried working with police but hit walls. How he'd started investigating on his own, tracking down Dad's co-workers, obtaining copies of documents. How he'd discovered the fraud was bigger than Dad had realized. A network of accounting firms and corrupt officials laundering money through city development projects. An entry from 6 months after Dad's disappearance. I've made contact with Claire, brought her a casserole and helped fix her leaking faucet. I feel like a monster using her grief to stay close to the case, but I need access to Thomas's belongings. She seems so broken. Lily barely speaks. I want to tell them what I know, but I can't. Not yet. Another entry, 3 months later. I'm falling in love with Claire. This wasn't supposed to happen. I came into her life to investigate Thomas's disappearance, to find justice for my best friend. But she makes me laugh. She's strong and kind. I'm a terrible person for feeling this way. The entries continued, documenting David's internal struggle between his investigation and his growing feelings for Mom, his proposal, the wedding, moving us into his house so he could continue the investigation without suspicion. Every milestone of our family life overlaid with his secret mission. The most recent entry was dated last month. Lily turns 18 in 6 weeks, old enough to handle the truth. I found him. After 11 years, I finally found where they put Thomas. But I can't go to the police. Too many connections to the people involved. I need her help. She deserves to know her father didn't choose to leave her. The word made everything inside me go cold. I looked back at the wall, at a section labeled Suspects. 11 photographs arranged in a circle. Thomas Kimball, CEO of Kimball Development Group. 3 partners from Dad's accounting firm. A police detective named Harold Finch. 2 city council members. All connected by lines showing business relationships, money transfers, mutual favors. The computer was password protected. I tried Dad's birthday. Wrong. My birthday. Wrong. Then Mom and Dad's anniversary. It opened. Inside was a map with one red pin dropped in the mountains north of the city. The label read, Riverside Construction Site. Concrete foundation poured February 14, 2013, 4 days after Thomas disappeared. Owned by Kimball Development Group, under investigation for fraud. I heard footsteps above, moving toward the basement stairs. David was looking for me. I scrambled to put folders back, my hands trembling. Then I saw it. A second door, small and half-hidden behind one of the file cabinets. I pulled it open, a crawl space leading under the rest of the basement. I squeezed through, pulling the door shut behind me as I heard the deadbolt turn. I crawled fast through cobwebs and insulation, following light ahead. The crawl space opened into the main basement behind the water heater. I emerged covered in dust, gasping. Mom stood at the basement stairs with grocery bags. She looked at me, at my filthy clothes, and frowned. "Were you crawling around under there?" I said I'd dropped my phone, and it had rolled under the water heater. The lie came easily. Mom accepted it, already heading upstairs. "David wants your help bringing in the rest of the bags. They cut the conference short because of a storm warning." David stood in the driveway unloading luggage. His eyes met mine, and I saw the calculation there. He knew. I'd been in his room. Everything had changed. He didn't say anything. Just handed me a suitcase and asked if I'd help carry it to their bedroom. Normal, casual, like my entire world hadn't just fractured. That night, after Mom went to bed, I heard footsteps outside my door. A soft knock. David's voice. "Lily, we should talk." We descended into his secret room, the door locking behind us. David sat at the desk, head in his hands before speaking. "I knew you'd find it eventually. You're exactly like him, too smart to accept simple answers. I'd planned to tell you on your birthday, but maybe this is better. No more lies." I asked the question burning in my throat. "Is he alive?" David's hands stilled. Long silence. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked. "No, I don't think so. The construction site, it went down 12 feet deep. If he's there..." He stopped, unable to finish. I sat on the cot, the thin mattress barely cushioning the concrete. "Why didn't you go to the police?" "Because the police are part of it." David pulled up a file showing me a bank statement. Detective Harold Finch received a $75,000 wire transfer from a shell company owned by Thomas Kimball 3 weeks after your dad disappeared. The corruption goes through the police department, city council, the courts. Your father discovered a fraud scheme involving hundreds of millions. They couldn't let him expose it. "So you married my mother and pretended for 11 years? David flinched. "I married your mother because I fell in love with her. That was never pretending. But yes, I stayed close to protect you both and to continue the investigation. If Kimball knew I was asking questions, they'd make me disappear too. Maybe you and Claire as well. So you've just been waiting? For enough evidence that the FBI has to act, for you to be old enough to help. There's someone I need you to meet. Your father's secretary, Margaret Chen. She's been in hiding for 11 years because she saw too much. She won't talk to men. Too afraid. She might talk to you, his daughter." David pulled out plane tickets, hotel reservations. "She's agreed to meet next month on your birthday. Just you and her. I'll be nearby, but she won't see me. She has proof, Lily. Photographs she took in the parking garage. Emails your father sent her outlining the fraud. She's kept everything. She just needs someone she can trust to give it to." I stared at the tickets, my hands shaking. "What happens after?" "We take everything to the FBI. Multiple field offices simultaneously so it can't be buried. We make sure you and Claire are somewhere safe before it goes public. And then we hope justice happens." The next 4 weeks were careful preparation. David coached me on what to say to Margaret Chen, how to respond to her fears. We practiced scenarios while maintaining perfect normalcy around Mom. She was planning my birthday dinner, talking about college applications, completely unaware her husband and daughter were preparing to expose a murder conspiracy. My 18th birthday arrived on a Saturday. Mom made pancakes, gave me a necklace with a small diamond. David gave me a laptop for college. We had cake with friends. Normal celebration. No one knew that tomorrow, David and I were flying to Denver under the pretense of touring colleges. Denver was cold when we landed. David went over the plan. Margaret would meet me at a coffee shop downtown at 2 o'clock. I'd go in alone. David would watch from across the street through a camera feed, ready to intervene if anything felt wrong. The coffee shop was busy with Sunday customers. I ordered a latte and found the back corner table. 2 o'clock passed. Then 2:15, 2:30. At 2:45, a woman entered wearing oversized sunglasses and a baseball cap. Thin, maybe 60, with gray hair. She scanned the room nervously before approaching. "You look exactly like him," she said quietly, sliding into the seat across from me. Her hands were shaking. "I've been carrying his ghost for 11 years. Every day I think about what I saw, what I didn't do. I could have screamed in that parking garage. Could have called 911 instead of going to that corrupt detective." She pulled an envelope from her purse, thick with papers. "These are the emails your father sent me the week before he disappeared. He knew he'd discovered something dangerous. There are photographs, too, on this USB drive. I took them from my office window. You can see the men forcing him into the SUV. You can see the license plate. I took the envelope with trembling hands. Why now? Because I'm dying. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4, 6 months if I'm lucky. And I can't die knowing I let them get away with it. She stood to leave. I grabbed her wrist. Will you testify? She looked at me, eyes full of tears. Yes, I'm already dying. What more can they take from me? Back at the hotel, we spread Margaret's evidence across David's bed. The emails were damning. Dad explaining how Kimball Development was winning city contracts through bribery, how the accounting firm partners were falsifying audits, how the fraud totaled over $200 million. The photographs showed 2 men grabbing Dad in the parking garage. Dad is struggling, one hitting him with something, Dad crumpling, both dragging his unconscious body toward a black SUV. The license plate is clearly visible. David cross-referenced the plate. Registered to Kimball Development Group, assigned to Thomas Kimball's head of security. This is it, David said quietly. This is everything we need. We can finally go to the FBI. The next month was careful planning. David identified FBI field offices with agents who had no connections to Kimball's network. He prepared encrypted copies of everything. He reached out to investigative journalists. We told Mom we were planning a surprise beach vacation for her. She was thrilled, completely unaware we were moving her to safety. We flew to North Carolina, renting a beach house. Mom was radiantly happy, walking the beach at sunset, cooking elaborate meals. On Friday morning, while she slept, David and I drove to a FedEx office and mailed packets to 3 FBI field offices simultaneously. Each contained copies of everything: Margaret's evidence, David's investigation files, detailed documentation of the corruption network. The story broke 72 hours later. Mom was reading on the beach when her phone lit up with news alerts. She grabbed it, and I watched her face drain of color. She turned to David with absolute betrayal. What did you do? We told her everything. She listened without speaking, then walked away down the beach. When she returned 2 hours later, her eyes were red. She looked at David like he was a stranger. You've been lying to me since the day we met. You married me to investigate Thomas's death. You used me. I married you because I love you, David said. That was never a lie. But yes, I needed to stay close to the case. I needed to protect you and Lily. Don't. Mom's voice was ice. Don't make this about protecting us. You manipulated us for 11 years. She locked herself in the bedroom. The FBI raided Kimball Development headquarters 3 days later. Thomas Kimball was arrested trying to flee with $3 million in cash. Detective Finch was found dead in his car, apparent suicide. City council members resigned. Margaret Chen testified from a hospital bed, dying, but finally unburdened. She died 4 days later. The FBI excavated the construction site. Ground-penetrating radar showed an anomaly in the foundation. They drilled through 12 feet of concrete poured 13 years ago. They found human remains wrapped in plastic. Dental records confirmed it was Thomas Waverly. My father had been dead for 13 years, buried in concrete, while I'd believed he'd abandoned us. While Mom had grieved and remarried. While his best friend had slept in his bed and played detective, carrying this knowledge alone. Mom divorced David. She couldn't forgive the deception. David moved out. I still see him sometimes. He may not be my father by blood, but he kept his promise to mine. I'm studying criminal justice now. I understand that justice sometimes lives in a locked room surrounded by evidence, waiting patiently for the moment when truth can finally come to light. My father didn't abandon us. He died trying to expose corruption, and his best friend spent 13 years proving it. Thanks for sticking around till the end. If you want more stories like this, hit subscribe and drop your thoughts below. Would you have for